and most interns didn't last. And so they really, I came in, was there every day at 5 a.m., did my job, did whatever I was asked to do.
And then all of a sudden they announced that they just cut a deal with Howard. So at that point, they tell me, well, we're still kind of interested in you, but it would probably only be with Howard's blessing. And, at this point, Howard and I were arch nemesis. Like,
I heard Jackie quit the show. Yes, he did. And I said, is that what this is about? And he said, yes, it is. And I was like,
early 2000s, you start calling in from Las Vegas, and then it turns into, I've got an idea every day. Tell me a little bit about just the beginnings of Shuli. You were a comedian, you're working out in Las Vegas, and you're thinking, I want to be part of this show. How do I do it?
Yeah, I mean, I had lived in L.A. for 10 years. That's where I discovered Howard in the early 90s when he came on in L.A. And then by the time I got to Vegas, I mean, I had listened to so much of the show. I recorded best ofs on cassettes. Whenever I would go on drives with my family, I'd force them to listen to it. So I was a huge, huge fan. And, as far as calling in, like, as dumb as it sounds and as wild as it sounds, it was literally like a movie, like it was scripted. Like I had this idea because he announces one night, I'm coming to Vegas to do a set of shows from the Hard Rock, and we're going to make bets at the blackjack table. And I'm like, shit, I'm going to call in. I had heard this like stock joke I worked in this liquor souvenir store in downtown Vegas, like right by where the county jail is and where all the pawn shops are and the Fremont Street Experience. So I used to meet a lot of interesting people. And this one guy told me this stock joke that I just thought was so funny. It's a street joke. So I said, you know what? I'm going to call in. I'm going to proposition how I'm going to say, I'm going to tell you this joke. And if you laugh, I want to make a bet with you guys at the table. And I pick up the phone. I dial the 800 number and sure enough, picks up, first time, Benji screening the calls. And he's like, what do you want to talk to Howard about? And I tell him, and he puts me on hold. And 2 minutes later, I'm on the air with Howard doing the joke. He laughed. And next thing you know, he's like, hold on for Gary. And from 10, 11 years of listening, my first call, I got booked to make a bet with them at the blackjack table.
Remember that? Yeah. Scott Einzinger basically put you guys together, right? That's how you got it. Was at E, right?
Yeah, Scott and I started working together in August 1994.
I think it was July.
So I came on first week in August, so you were there 2 weeks before me. Yeah. But yeah, it goes back. So do the math. What is that, 27 years ago? Jeez.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
It was, a small crew. It was, about 4 or 5 techs and 2 or 3 producers, Ganji included.
Yeah, it was me, Ganji, Radzinski, and Einziger. Pretty much, that was it.
So Scott, you directed the first E show that...
No, what had happened was I did camera work for the first maybe 2 months, and our director got sick. No, actually, our director wanted to leave and go back to L.A. He told another guy to do it, who was our engineer. He started doing it, wasn't very good. He got sick. They said, well, Scott, why don't you do it? So I did a great job. And then when he came back, they said, we want Scott to keep doing it.
Was it a great job, Doug? Did you feel that way, that he was, or did he just tell, or he was just very good at telling people that he was doing a great job?
No, Scott is a very good director that I'm glad he acknowledged it, because he's really good. And I've seen a lot of directors work with a lot of directors, and he's right up there with the best of them. He really is. To work that spontaneously and put out a quality product when you go into post-production and have minimal edits and fixes to the line cut, besides like sprucing it up with graphics and B-roll. Scott was really good, really good. Yeah. In fact, the first director was a real big wig director, and he didn't get it. That's part of the reason. I don't know if he left or just wasn't feeling it, or if LA was an excuse, but he just didn't get it. He was producing line cuts that were pretty bad. And yeah, he's directing a major syndicated show right now. He's still in the business, but he just didn't get that spontaneous.
I think it was more he didn't jive with Howard, though the two of them didn't see eye to eye.
I was kind of just looking back, and in 1985, you show up at K-Rock, and it wasn't K-Rock then. You guys flipped the format, and then a few months later, Howard becomes the afternoon guy, and then the fun begins. So tell me a little bit about just that rise from basically 1985 to mid-90s. At that point, it was just Howard in New York, and Howard was a big deal in New York, but he wasn't a big deal everywhere. But then we get into the mid-90s, and you start, you go out to Philadelphia, you go out to L.A., he starts getting affiliates. You see this thing starting to get bigger, and then they start putting cameras in the studio. I'm just curious about that little 10-year window when you start realizing, or do you realize, we got something here. You obviously knew that you had a big deal because he was a big deal in New York, but the fact that maybe nationally this thing would work, and did you want that to even happen for him?
Well, first, I had worked for the company for a few years before, and it was in Jacksonville, Florida. It was the first radio station that I was ever the general manager at was in Jacksonville, Florida. Moved back to New York, as you said, in '85. It was KTU then. We flipped the format that summer. It was the first Live Aid. It was the day we flipped the format and became K-Rock. And then in November of '85, we hired Howard. It really, that final decision wasn't mine. That was made above me by Mel Karmazin. But it was one that, despite Howard saying I didn't, I did. I totally endorsed it. I was all for it. I had enough experience, having been in Chicago, as a sales manager, to have seen the chance that the radio station I worked at to hire a named personality, and we didn't do it, and it was a big mistake. And I wasn't totally familiar with Howard. I listened to him, and certainly knew that there was unique talent there. But did we think we had the greatest performer in the history of radio? In 1985, no. We knew he had something big, and I knew he was special. But obviously nobody knew how big he was going to get and how good he was going to, how well he was going to grow. And because it was November and afternoons to January, I think it was, or February to mornings. And that's when, that's really where he should have been from the beginning. It was and is still the most important day part in radio. That's when most people listen. At least I think so. I've kind of stopped paying attention since I left, but I don't think that pattern has changed. And he took off. He took off really quickly. And the syndication was, I wasn't directly involved in the syndication, other than just trying to make sure that as the show got to other markets, I wasn't making decisions on markets. That was made above me. I'm not going to take credit for things that I don't deserve credit for. I do deserve the credit for beating up my suit and doing some other things, but putting him into Philadelphia and these other places where he wanted to go, was not me.
Tell me what that means. So he says, "Hey, come with me." What is that? Does he want you to be the Tom Chiasano? Is that basically what people are thinking of that role? And is it all sales? What does it mean to build out his channels? Because obviously September 2004, he announces it, but you don't really get going until October of 2005. So there's this whole year of people waiting to see what's going to happen.
Well, when we first started talking about it, I think it was in July or August, and he asked me if I'd be interested, and I was like, oh my gosh. And once we started talking, I got more and more excited about it, and I said, yeah, let's do this. So I started in, I think it was late August, September of 2005, and you walk in the door, and they hand you, a balance sheet, and if the lower, or a budget, and in the lower right-hand corner, it has a number, and here's what it is, and you have to build out a channel. And it's like landing on the moon. There's no food, shelter, or water, no staff, no offices per se, no studios, all these kinds of things. So we basically literally started from scratch, and I sat down with Howard, and he told me his vision and what he thought it should be and so forth. And I sat down and took notes for literally 2 weeks and just exhausted him over the course of that time, asking question after question after question. Then went back and put together a proposal, what I thought it should be based on what his vision was. And we agreed to it. And then I started hiring a staff, started to put programming on the channels just to get some workflow and to understand, cause and effect.
What's your first thought? Is it, this can't be real? What are they going to be doing? Tell me a little bit about when you hear about it and how it's presented to you and how you decide, this does sound like something that's actually going to be something that I can do for what you did it almost, 7 years there, right?
6 years, yes. What happened was when Howard was within a few months of going to satellite radio from K-Rock in New York, he gave an interview to the New York Times. He gave a lot of interviews, but one to the New York Times, which I read every day, worship that news organization. He said in it that he wanted to start a news team. And I thought, what the hell? Whoa, wait a minute. So I contacted a couple of people who I thought might have contact with Sirius or with Howard or something like that, and never expected to hear anything. And then I got a phone call one morning, and they said, listen, can you come in on Monday and see us? I was like, yeah, sure, absolutely. And I stayed 6 years.
So what was that? What was those early days like? Because from what I remember, the news team kind of came on the air before Howard even could go on the air. He started at 1906. Everybody remembers that. But Sirius, his channels kind of went live, I believe, September, October. And the first thing I think people heard was like Ralph Howard and this news team. And you guys start reporting. So give me just that background of just that starting. It's basically a startup news company with a startup Howard Stern channel that most startups don't get this sort of backing, but that people are going to be listening.
Yeah, it was extraordinary how people listened. We got there. We were mostly hired around the same time, a bunch of us. And my attitude was, I don't go into every job like this, but in that job, I knew exactly what to do. Just tell stories with a lot of color. And so I didn't ask anybody what to do. I just did it. And it was great because it was a blank slate. And by and large, nobody ever said anything about, how you're supposed to do it. I knew how to do it, and I did it. Not everybody liked it, but that's the way I do news. So one of the first memories of being there at the beginning, it was only a few days in, and we were jammed in this tiny little newsroom on the 36th floor at Sirius, and we had not met Howard Stern yet. None of that I know of. I certainly have. And Howard Stern and Ed Bradley march into this tiny room. And Ed Bradley says, well, Howard, what's going on here? And Howard says, well, this is actually our new news team. We just hired these people, and they're reporting on everything going on in the world of Howard Stern. And Ed Bradley says to Howard, as the cameras are rolling, well, what are they reporting on right now? And he said, well, actually, I think they're reporting on something called the Craptacular.
Do you know what June 6, 2003 is? Does that date ring a bell for you?
I was not on the grassy knoll, if that's what you're asking. Well, what is that?
Your first day sitting in on the show, according to marksfriggin.com. And I'm curious about just sitting in on the show. So you're a caller. You're starting to make your way through, but now you're asked to sit in. What is that day like when they call? Just give me a little bit about that. I'm sure it's Gary, but tell me who calls. Where are you, and what's that feeling like when they're like, dude, you're gonna be not just calling in, not just being in for the news. You're on. I mean, you started the day that morning on the show, according to Mark Friggin, and I sort of remember it.
Yeah, it was wild, man. It was. To think that they would even give me this opportunity just shows how poor the booking was back then, really, is what it shows. There's no reason I wasn't ready. I didn't know shit about radio. I wasn't really funny then. You know what I mean? Like, I was so new to everything. But again, here's the thing, right? Like, I was calling in with material. I was calling in with games, with questions on my own. Nobody asked me to do it. There was no payment for it. I used to have comics in Vegas that would be like, what the fuck are you doing? You're staying up till 6 a.m, calling some fucking show. The guy doesn't pay you. And I'm just like, how do you not get this? To me, it was a no-brainer. I'm like, because, Stuttering John would sit here and go, oh, he loves your calls. Or Benji would say, oh, he really likes your stuff. That's all I need to hear. That's it. I'm doing, that's my job now. And that's literally how I treated it. So when they brought me in, I mean, I'm almost positive, because I don't remember a lot about it. I'm almost positive it was terrible. I remember I sat in for the news once at K-Rock, and Gary, to my face after the segment, I go, I'm just sitting there in my head going, I wonder how that went. And he goes, no, you did a great job. He goes, why don't you go hang out in the Yucko the Clown room, which was his way of saying the bomb room. And I'm like, I remember at one point Howard saying, and I don't know if it was this appearance, but I remember at one point saying, I like when you call in because I can hang up on you. He's like, can you go call in from the green room? So I probably was just shot out of a cannon, blah, 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 all over the place. I know it didn't go well.
So just give me that day when you get the call that Howard 101 is going to be happening. I guess Tim Sabian's probably the guy that you knew. Tell me how this all came about, that you start working on a Howard channel, and what it meant when you heard that this was happening to you.
Well, in actuality, I'd gotten fired in March of 2004 for having the second largest fine. In fact, the big Nipplegate Janet Jackson thing that was started by Fred Upton, the congressman from Michigan, and then subsequently became a big witch hunt into, a television nipple issue ended up being, two of the Howard and I were the two largest casualties. Howard had 31 CBS backed affiliates. Says it didn't really matter to him. I didn't. I got fired in March of 2004, and I didn't have anything to do. Well, immediately I started talking to Jeremy Coleman from Sirius, and of course Sirius and XM were two different entities back then. And so I started talking to Jeremy Coleman, and I was slated. And I don't know that if Howard knows this or not. I'm sure he does. But I was talking to Jeremy Coleman and Jay Clark, and Jay Clark was the president of programming at the time. And they initially were going to make me. I was going to come in and be the morning guy on Sirius. The job that Howard had. And at that point, things started happening, and it got to be like July, August of 2004. And I think at that point, Howard kind of became a little bit available, or Ross Sapin started talking to somebody on Howard's behalf. And all of a sudden, they stopped talking to me altogether. I almost had my deal done in like July of 2004, and I was going to start in the fall. And all of a sudden, Walter Sabo and Jay Clark and all these guys that I'm talking to get this deal done on Sirius stop. And they're like, I remember in October of 2004, I got a call from Walter Sabo, and he's like, Bubba, there's been a change in the wind here, and we aren't interested in you being the morning guy anymore. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And then all of a sudden they announced that they just cut a deal with Howard. So at that point, they tell me, well, we're still kind of interested in you, but it would probably only be with Howard's blessing. And, at this point, Howard and I were arch nemesis. Like I'd been syndicated in Hartford, and I talked all this shit about Howard, and, Howard's a pussy, and Howard's not a real man, and I'm a real man. I fucking can drive a truck, and I can run a bulldozer, and I'll kick your ass. Just the standard, radio shit. And, fuck you, Howard. I'm going to write some parody songs about how stupid you are, and, all this kind of how you look like Big Bird and all this bullshit. And did the same shit that Howard, did, like with John DeBella and all, the standard radio stuff. And at that point, then Brent Hatley, my producer, called up Don Buchwald and said, can we put our name in the hat or something? And in Thanksgiving of that year, Howard summons us to come up to New York. And so Brent Hatley and I flew to New York. It was a week before Thanksgiving.
So fortunately for me in the organization, I worked hand in hand with Bubba on this deal. So you can go back to 2004. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and I'm talking with Bubba, and he's like, "Hey, why don't you give Gary dell'abate a call and see, like, with this Sirius channel if we can get the afternoon slot?" I was like, I love Gary, but I'm calling Don's office. I'm calling Don Buchwald's office. So I called Don Buchwald's office, and I expected to leave a message with his assistant. His assistant puts me through to his cell phone, like live. So Don gets on the phone with me and says, "Hey, you and Bubba be in my office. This is on Tuesday at noon." I'm like, "We'll be there." So we're there Tuesday at noon, and we bring all these materials to give Don for him to review. And we want to be on the channel. And Don sits us down on a couch in his office, and he says, "We have a list of people that we want to work with, and there's one show on that list, and you're that show. And we know all this stuff. We've already looked to it," because of course they had. Of course they'd done their research and looked around. So he says, "Come back at 4. Howard will be here." So Howard and Bubba sat down at 4 o'clock. They let all of bygones be bygones. But like I said, it was childish name calling. It wasn't anything really serious. So they worked that all out, and that was at the end of 2004.
What was it like the first time you got called in there? I don't feel like you get real worked up, or for what I can tell, but it had to be kind of cool. How did that happen? Does Gary call you? Just give me that first trip into the Howard Stern show, because that does, when a stand-up comedian walks in there, they can walk out and then start selling out shows for 6 months, a year, 5 years.
It was unbelievable. I remember it was July 18, 2001. I still remember that date like it's someone's birthday or a death date. No, I was always a big fan. Like, I worked construction. I was a landscaper. So I'd always, especially I lived in New Jersey, so he was big in New York. So that's all I did was listen to Howard Stern constantly. So I was a huge fan of the show. I started doing comedy, and I put out these prank call CDs, and I mailed it into the show, and they started playing it on the air. And, they're like, "Oh, we got to have this guy in. He's really funny." And then they go, "Oh, okay, you're booked. You're going to sit in for a whole day on this day in July. And, if you know the show, you know when they, jump in and jump out." I'm like, "All right, great." I just couldn't believe it. I mean, I remember being in the green room like 10 to 6. The show starts at 6 a.m. And I'm just standing there. And I see Howard walk by. I see Robin. I see Fred. I see everybody. I'm like, "Oh, I can't believe I'm here." I'm like, "This is unbelievable. I've been fans of these people forever." I go, "All right, I can't mess it up." I go, "I got one shot." I go, "So just pretend like they're just your friends." I go, "You know the show, so just bust balls. That's the show." I remember like the first 3 minutes, Howard's like, "Hey, nice to meet you," whatever. Jim's going to sit in the show. And he's right in there telling a story about him and Beth, his wife, on the beach. And they found like a bird or something like that, and they saved the bird, and he had a tear in his eye. And I go, "Howard, I go, you should really check your pants for penis." And he just, I knew it to throw it out, and he just lost it. And I was like, "God, I got my first laugh." That was like 5 minutes into the show.
So this is obviously Jackie had just left, and this is that point where they were sort of auditioning for that chair. Were you auditioning, or were you just sitting in? Because we know Artie gets it at the end of the year, but I know Craig Gass was in there, Ron Zimmerman, Fitzsimmons, I believe. They just kind of brought in a bunch of guys. I don't know if they were. Did you feel like you were auditioning, or was it just, "Hey, just sit in"? And how did they explain it to you?
No, it wasn't an audition. They just said, "Look, we're going to have different guys, a rotating guest to sit in. We're going to rotate you guys. We're going to pick like 8 or 10 guys." And I'm like, "Okay." So we didn't even know it was an audition, but I guess at some point they go, "Hey, we like Artie's the best for this job, so let's hire him," which is fine. I mean, he was great for the job. I mean, I wasn't jealous or anything like when he got the job. Like, okay, that's fine. I was still going on the show all the time, so it didn't really make a difference.
So I am a huge Stern fan. You went on there in January of 2017. I remember this day because I think I saw it on Twitter, and so I don't have Sirius. I'm like, I'm going to have to activate. I have to hear this. I texted you after it, and I remember I actually looked to see today. You're like, "That was a thrill." Tell me just how did that. I know it was during the book tour, but just tell me everything. How did you get booked onto Howard and that experience? Because you seemed pretty geeked up to be on there as well.
I was doing the Super Bowl at the end of that week. I think that was Monday. And that following Sunday, I was going to do the Super Bowl, and I was more worried and excited about going on Stern than I was to do the Super Bowl, at least the worried part. Definitely excited about doing the Super Bowl. Way more worried about what Howard was going to ask me because he's not a sports fan, and he's the first guy to tell you that. So had I not written the book, where I talk about losing my voice because of getting hair plug surgery or going through divorce or, kind of the inner workings of what a broadcast is about, just different things, my family history, whatever, that I think opened me up to potentially being a guest. I'm not going to go on there. He's not interested in interviewing me to talk about this week's All-Star game. That's just not on his radar. So I have a publicist, Louis K. Covert Creative, I think is the name of it. I hired them at one point when I was putting the book out. And then, so they start, lining up interviews, and they have a great relationship with Gary dell'Abate. He pitched me. Somehow they said yes. And then I've done it a second time since then. And had my wife come on. So it's just kind of hard to believe that I got a chance to do it. And it was great. I think I learned a lot when I sat there, because I noticed how locked into me and my answers he was. Like I had done other interviews. I did the Tonight Show when Jay Leno was hosting, and another not huge sports guy, but he was looking past me the entire time, looking for cues from the producer or whatever. And it's unnerving. It's like, am I boring you, or how am I going to get your attention back? And Howard was just locked in, and such a friendly face, like with a smile that just makes you want to talk. And I get it. I get why people go on. If you go on Howard Stern and you're not ready to kind of bear all, good luck, because he will get it out of you. So you might as well just have fun with it and just come with it, because he's going to eventually get there anyway. And it was a blast, and he was great, and he could not have been nicer. And it's one of the biggest thrills of my career.
I think your best call is your call of JD eating breakfast.
Yeah, that was the first thing that they had me do too, because I got in there early. They're like, "Hey, would you mind doing play-by-play of JD eating his breakfast?" And I was like, "Oh my God, really? Okay." So they gave me, a few stats, like how many grams of fat the sandwich was that he was eating, and so there I am. It's like surreal. Here I am looking at him through a glass door and doing the play-by-play. They did such a good job of editing that thing, because it was not that funny when I did it, but they put it together in a way that made it a lot more entertaining than it otherwise would have been. So, and then I did a phony phone call, which, I love listening to those. And all they did was had me record lines. I was never on the phone with, who they ended up matching it up with. And they're just firing off little sound bites of me talking. And I was in awe when I listened to it. So like, got it. I mean, you can tell that there's a bit of a disconnect, but it sounds like I'm giving the guy trouble on the other end of the phone line. And I was never on with anybody. I was recording in a studio, these random lines that they gave me.
And I put together a tape of all these voices that I did, and I overnighted it to the Howard Stern show, and I think I labeled the tape Satan, and then I put in a little note like, "Hey Gary, this tape will scare the shit out of you." The next day, someone at the radio station, a receptionist, said, "Hey, you have a phone call from Gary dell'Abate. He wants you to call him." And I was like, "That's it." And I went out and got hammered for like a week. I just went out and got shit-faced and just celebrated like, "Oh, it's going to be great news." And then a week later, the receptionist said, "Hey, Gary dell'Abate called and said, can you please call when you have time?" And I was like, "Oh, fuck. That's right." So I called him up, and Gary said, "Hey, so I got your tape, and man, all the voices, like who's doing all the voices on the tape?" And I said, "Well, that's me. That's me doing everything on there." And he said, "So is that you doing the Sam Kinison?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You Sam Kinison, like we knew Sam better than anybody, and we thought it was him, man. That's how fucking good it was." And I was like, "Well, I'd love to work with you guys someday." And he said, "Well, actually, we have an idea." And I started doing some stuff on the Stern Show, and it was just really fucking like hardcore. Every time an asshole died, like someone we could all agree is an asshole, like Jeffrey Dahmer, when someone like Jeffrey Dahmer died, I would call in the next day as Sam Kinison calling live from the gates of hell with a dead guy. And it would just be, hey guys, it's Sam Kinison. I'm down here in hell, and I got Jeffrey Dahmer down here, and he's looking at my ass like it's a TiVo. Oh! And it was just dark. It was so fucking dark. And then over the years, I remember I would call in as different celebrities. No, actually, first I started writing, and I asked, because Jackie would write all my material, and Jackie's material coming through Sam's voice sounded like Jackie's jokes through Sam's voice. And I remember saying, like, hey, I feel like this isn't authentic to Sam. I feel like Sam would have a different approach to these thoughts and these ideas. And Gary said, well, send me something. We'll take a look at it, man. And I sent him a script. And they're like, oh, this is good. You know what? You should start writing for the show. And so I started writing my own scripts. And at that point, I'm thinking, fuck, I should probably go back to New York. And so there was a comedian that I worked with a lot out in Seattle who was living in New York named Mitch Hedberg. And I asked Mitch, like, hey, Mitch, would it be cool if I need to be out in New York? You know, is it okay if I stay with you for a little bit until I get on my feet? He was like, hell yeah, man, you can stay as long as you want. And I moved in with Mitch, and I started writing for Howard. I started writing for Weekend Update. And then I just started going into some weird fucking directions because I felt so much love from Howard for what I was doing.
And Howard, we go to stay in this hotel, and I'd never been to New York a lot. You know, I'm just some stupid guy from Indiana that to travel around or a little bit radio, but I never been in New York that many times. And we're staying near Don Buchwald's office, and I had to go and have a kind of a conversation with Howard. And so, listen, all these radio guys can act like you're big, bad, and tough, but Howard Stern is still fucking Howard Stern. Like, you know, even though he was my arch nemesis, every one of us would love to be Howard Stern. Every one of us would love to have his success.
What did you think that was going to be like? Were you worried that
No.
Did you think he was going to be like, who, what are you, because he could just bring you up and just, maul you and say, get out of here.
You could have just said, listen, you stupid. Look how fat you are. You're so fucking stupid. You think I'd give you a chance? Get the fuck out of here. Like, I didn't have any idea. So I go there, and I go to Don Buchwald's office, and and the secretary goes, Don, go inside Don's office. He's waiting for you. So I just thought that Howard was going to be in there, And so I go in there, and there's Don, and what a nice man. He's just very calculated and calm and patient, and just, old school. And he's like, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. And he acts like he genuinely cares, and he's writing some notes down. And so I'm kind of thinking, okay, well, I'm probably not going to meet Howard. Don's going to either tell Howard I'm a weirdo or I'm okay or, whatever. So about 15 minutes, and Don's asked me, where you grow up and, where are you from and blah, blah, blah. Never mentioned Howard one time. So about 15, 20 minutes go by, and he goes, you know what, now, Bob, I'll tell you what. I want you to go past my secretary, walk out of my office, go past my secretary, and on the second door on your right-hand side, there's a conference room. I need you to go in there and wait for Howard. And I'm like, oh, fuck. So I go in there, and it's just a regular conference room, but it's really dark, really no lights on or nothing. And about 2 minutes later, here comes Howard. And he walks in, and I can remember like nothing. He had brown construction boots on, like cat, military, which made him even more taller. Because, I think the first thing, I'm 5'11", 5'10". The first thing you notice is how tall Howard is. And he walks in, and I stand up, and he bumps my fist, and we sit down. He sits down across from me, and we start talking like a couple little radio bitches, just all about radio. Hey, when you were at, in Detroit, and, hey, what do you think about, Phil Hendry? And, hey, man, remember the old the old Neil Rogers and Miami, and oh my God, and, you know, Howard, when you did the John DeBella funeral, I was in Philly, and I actually worked for Q102, and I went to the funeral, and we just hit it off like a couple little radio bitches, and we probably talked for like an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and he got up and said, you know what, I like you. I think you have what I'm looking for. I'm familiar with your career. And he said, now I'm going to make a phone call. I'm going to tell Sirius that I'd like for them to cut a deal with you. And he said these words to me. He looked at me in my eyes and he said these words to me, and it forever held true. He said, don't ask me to ever get involved with your money or your contract or anything. I don't want any part of that. Go cut your best deal, but keep me out of that. I'm going to give him my blessing. And, you know, hopefully you can work out a deal.
And then a few months later, I get a call from SiriusXM and from Bubba saying, hey, listen, Howard wants to borrow you to come up there and help develop the channels and get them ready for channel launch. Because basically you just had 2 channels there with nothing. Like nothing had been done. So it was like 4 of us there was a senior vice president and then a consultant and then a couple of us that actually, you know, put a lot of the work into getting the channels ready. So I was fortunate to be involved in it the whole time, and I was fortunate to be, you know, selected by the Howard Stern team to come up and help with channel launch. And Bubba was gracious enough to let me do that. And then I finished that up in October of 2005, came back, helped Bubba get ready for channel launch in January of 2006, and we all went up together in January of 2006 and did the first 2 weeks live from Sirius. So it was an incredible experience, something I'll never forget for sure.
You were one of those kind of lifer guys. Like you showed up kind of with Grillo and Stuttering John. I think Stuttering John was there before you got there. But just talk about how you ended up in the Howard Stern universe. It was an internship, right? Or is that?
Yeah. I started as an intern. I was 20 years old going into my junior year of college. And it's interesting because I knew of Howard, wasn't really a fan because I didn't really listen to talk radio at that point. You know, 20 years old, I was probably just listening to like some Headbangers music in my car whenever I was in it. So I wasn't really listening to that kind of entertainment. I was going to college at Long Island University, CW Post, and I worked at the radio station, the college radio station, with this kid, Mike Navarro, who was interning on the show. He was Stuttering John's best friend. He was also interning at Howard with John, and he was graduating and leaving his internship. And I knew I was going to need one, so I asked Mike if he can set me up with an interview. And that's really how it all started, from knowing Mike Navarro from going to college.
And back then, it seemed like at Howard, if you hung on and just kind of did a good job, you got a job, right? And that's pretty much what happened, right?
Yeah, that's basically what happens. If you're good at your job or good enough at your job, and you're willing to work for nothing, which I was, which I worked for a little over 2 years for free. So for zero money, nothing, zero. So if you're willing to work for that kind of pay, you can go far in this industry. So I was able to, stay there. I showed up every morning because the biggest problem was prior to when I joined the show is they would get interns and you'd have to be in at 5 a.m. And for any, college age kid, being somewhere at 5 a.m. 5 days a week was not easy, and most interns didn't last. And so they really, I came in, was there every day at 5 a.m., did my job, did whatever I was asked to do, stayed until, 1, 2 o'clock, and then would go to college after that. But yeah, that was really, if you could just show up and be on time, that was considered the best you can do.
But you started as an intern, right? Just give me how that process works. I mean, I'm sure there's so many people that want.
All right, it's really kind of an interesting story. If I go on a little too long, cut me off. But I had a decision when I was in, I went to Catholic school. My parents asked me, if you want to go to Catholic high school, you can. If you don't, you can go to public. And I knew I would never survive physically. I would be cutting class, and I knew I needed an education. So I chose Catholic school. I wrestled in high school 4 years,
And
all right, you've already gone too long. I'm just kidding.
my father, you know, I wrestled, and my parents never said I didn't go to college. So I wound up my senior year. My father goes, if you want to go to college, I'll pay for it. So I got recruited by Hunter College, which is on Madison Avenue and 68th Street. No, it was on Lexington, 68th. And I listened to Howard every day on my headphones. And one day I heard him give out the address. It said 600 Madison. I'm like, that's like down the block. I went, cut class, went down, went to this about 600 Madison, went up to the 4th floor, and now I'm standing in the lobby of K-Rock. And I'm like, and I remember there's the receptionist and there was the door, and there was this really ugly green plant on the other side of the door. And all I could think about was, I have to get past that plant. And after that, I was determined. I'm relentless. When I want something, I'm going to get it. And I sent in a resume. I didn't hear back. Then I hand wrote a really pathetic resume, like a letter to Gary, and ripped it out of my spiral notebook. Had phrase on it. I stuffed it into an envelope. Gary called me back.
Didn't they read that they read that one on the air, I think, too, right? It had grammatical errors left and right, and I think that was part of the charm.
I played the pathetic fucking little, please help me. I need help.
But so was it an internship or was it more of a job?
Yeah, you understand, like, they only gave internships to seniors because you were about to graduate, and they wouldn't give me credits. So I went to the head of the communications department, told him he thought they were he dragged me down to the interim office and was like, you give this kid credit. So what? He's a freshman. And so I was the only freshman in Hunter College history to ever get a credit to do an internship.
That's pretty awesome. I know Hunter College was made fun of a lot, too. So what is your, first couple weeks? I know the potato became the big thing. Get Howard's potato. Get it right. And
I didn't get that internship right away, but Gary really liked me. But because I lived in Brooklyn and my commute was so far, he said that, I think you're great, but it's been my experience that if you are in Brooklyn, it's hard for you to get here at 5 o'clock and people don't show up. So he went with a girl that was at NYU, but he did give me a project. There was a bunch of show tapes that weren't logged. So I didn't get but I came in and I logged a bunch of old shows, but I didn't have to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning. But I showed up there at 6 o'clock in the morning because I'd be in the back office at a desk and I'd be listening to the show. And I just remember okay, yeah, bring in Gilbert Gottfried now. And I stand up and I watch Gilbert Gottfried walk into the studio. And I was like, I can't believe I'm here. So I made the mistake of going through that box rather quick. But I was there 5 days a week because I was working for the Howard Stern show. When the box ran out, I did such a good job. They brought me over to promotions. And promotions, there was a big dry erase board calendar with all the events. I was like, Grillo. I did everything I could possibly do 5 days a week. And it got noticed. And when Robin didn't like her news intern anymore, they gave it to me.
Howard had you on a lot. You obviously gave him Celebrity Scoop, which is I think is why he was having you on, right? Isn't that basically how it kind of started?
So how it all started for me, I was working for this magazine called Stepping Out, and I had done a review of a Sam Kinison performance, and it was terrible. He collapsed on stage. He couldn't finish the performance, so it was a very negative review. And 6 months later, Sam was backstage at a New Jersey comedy club, and I was backstage, just kind of hanging out. And his brother Bill goes, "Is your name Chauncey Hayden?" And I say, "Yeah." And he pulls the article that I had written 6 months earlier and says, "Sam, this is the guy." And they both attack me. And it turns to a big brawl in the green room. It made all the New York papers. And at that point, Stern had kind of had beginnings of that connection with Sam. And he was a part of the show. And he's like, "Did you read in the New York Post this morning? This guy, I think it's a guy, his name's Chauncey Hayden. He got into a fight with Sam." He goes, "This guy writes for a magazine called Stepping Out." He goes, "I've never heard of Stepping Out." He goes, "I think it's one of those penny savers." He goes, "Why is Sam, who's a famous comedian, getting into a fight with a guy named Chauncey from Stepping Out?" He goes, I gotta call Sam." And then I called in and said, "I'm the guy, I'm Chauncey." And Howard just went off. And it was so funny. He started making fun of me, making fun of the magazine, saying he was going to get me and Sam to make up on the air and fix this. Well, Sam never came on, but Howard had so much fun making fun of me and this idea that this kid with this giveaway free magazine was in all the New York papers. He's like, you love this. He goes, come on, your name's in the New York Post. This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to you. And from that day on, it was just a marriage. It just went on for the next 20 years. And Howard just loved, he's brilliant at creating characters. And that day, he created the character of Chauncey from Stepping Out.
And there was a company called E! Entertainment Television that I didn't really know much about. They were just starting up. And I get a call back on the phone, not an email back, because there was no email, from a guy named Scott Einziger. And Scott and I, coincidentally, about 2 weeks after about 2 days after I graduated college, I worked freelance for a film production company that, long story short, Scott Einziger also worked for that same film director. So he was just going, oh my God, we compared stories from this crazy director and we hit it off. We got along and he said, I have something evolving. And we met. And then sure enough, what was evolving was the Stern Show on E! And the rest is history. He hired me. I was associate producer. I worked my way up the food chain and lasted there for 19 years.
Yeah. So when you get this call, like, what did you think you'd be doing? And then what did you end up? I know they did a lot of outside shoots. You did a lot of stuff with Hank the Angry Dwarf, which I want to ask you about. But what was it sort of billed as to you? And then kind of what did it turn into before you became the executive producer later on?
Yeah, well, when I started, when I started at the E! Show, it was just myself, Mike Ganji, Robin Radzinski, and Scott Einziger. And then, of course, a few people on the tech crew, which is Scott DePace and guy we called Gump and an engineer. And that was it. It was like 7 or 8 of us. And so it was really doing everything and anything. Everything. I mean, Ganji and I would run out and we'd get props. We'd do shoots. We'd help produce studio segments. We'd help with bits, anything and everything. The rights and clearances, producing shows, everything. It was just so few of us. We did it all. It was such a great learning experience and such a great place to evolve.
Just how did you end up working for, it was E! At the time, I think, back in 02, 03 is when you showed up, right? And how did you get the job?
So what happened was I was working for a production company back in the 90s, and I got in touch with Scott Einziger, who was the greatest EP going, and he was doing side projects to Howard. This was before E! And when Howard ran for governor and he did his New Year's Eve special and anything he wanted to videotape, he would get Scott, and Scott would hire my company and we'd go out and we'd shoot whatever. And I got to, meet him and hang out with him and know him, and he's a great guy. And when the E! Show started, I had another job, so I didn't get the job with E! I didn't even apply for it. I just, was doing something else. And when that job went away, I called Scott and I said, listen, do you mind, you got anything available? And he said, yeah, there's a camera guy, our camera guy's leaving. If you want, try out. And I tried out and I got it. So I started in 97, and I did 8 years with E! And I did 8 years with In Demand.
So you went from I guess the studio got bigger at K-Rock, and then obviously way bigger at Sirius. But
so what happened was at K-Rock, there was 2 studios. There was one K-Rock, which was a real small studio. The first 3 years of E! was the original K-Rock, which was at 600 Madison. I was only there for like a month, maybe, not even, maybe like a week. And then that winter break happened, and then we came back and they built a new studio, which was the new K-Rock on 57th Street. And I started from day one there. And I did the whole time there. And then they had offsetting contracts between K-Rock, between radio and TV. So with 6 months left in his radio contract, and he was already going to Sirius, the E! contract was up, and he wasn't bringing E! to, satellites. So we parted ways in in June, and then for 6 months I kind of just freelanced around, and then nice enough, he hired us back, and we all got our jobs back at Howard TV.
In '98, CBS merged with Infinity. Mel Karmas in the radio group, and I'm like, holy shit, Howard Stern is now part of our family. And I just would tell anyone that would listen, we got to do something, Howard. We got to do something, Howard. And I was in a position to make something happen, and it was great. We set up. I pitched the idea, or the idea that we should do something with Howard, and that's when the Saturday night show came in. Which I said, let's not lie. Let's call it what it is: the Howard Stern Radio Show, which is what it was—a TV show that was basically the radio show. Excuse me, and that's when I got to work with Howard. And I, as a longtime listener, I'm sure you know, when you're in the Howard real world of working with him, whether you're his housekeeper or you bring him his coffee or whatever's in his world, if you're open to it, he'll pull you in. And I was absolutely open to it because I was such a fan, and that's how that happened. So there were days where then when Jackie left, I had been with the show long enough that Howard wanted me to sit in for some shows, which was amazing. That was another experience. And there were some days where I would be like, holy shit, I'm starting my day on the Howard Stern show on the air. And then I am, in the afternoon, I was working with Letterman every day, but there were times when I was on the Letterman show just as myself. And I'm like, this is too weird. And I'm proud to say I stopped and appreciated those moments. I'm like, this is going to end. It's not always going to be great. It may not even end great, but it's an incredible moment in time. And it was more than a few occasions where that happened. So it was wonderful.
Yeah. So the Howard, I want to do Letterman kind of towards the end because that's obviously a big part, but I love the Howard Stern stuff. So how many meetings do you have with Howard a week? I mean, did he know you at this point, or did you become, because you're...
what Howard was, it was incredible. We were partners in developing the show. We worked closely together. So before we launched the CBS show, we spent a lot of time together. He's a great guy, a great guy. And the off-the-air Howard was so, in some ways, so similar, but also different, like really a business guy. And really, like Dave, completely micromanaging in a good way every aspect of the show. It wasn't just stick a camera in here and put it on CBS. He had thoughts and opinions and strong feelings about a lot of things. So we were real partners on that. And going, when you're in the Howard world, there's weekly meetings, and unlike late night TV, the meetings, everyone is there. It's not just the writers. That's the great thing about Howard. A good idea is a good idea no matter where it came from. And with Howard, it was we hit the ground running, super, super close, which allowed that ease on air, I think.
I woke up one morning, I had 3 messages on my voicemail. The first message was, dude, Howard Stern is looking for new people. You got to call him up. Boop. Hey, dude, I don't know if you heard, man. Howard Stern says he's going to audition new comics because Jackie's off the show. Boop. Hey, Craig, it's Gary dell'abate. Call me as soon as you get this. And I was like, what the fuck? And then I called him up and I go, hey, Gary, what's going on? He goes, hey, how are you? And I was like, he's never asked me how I am. I'm doing great. I heard Jackie quit the show. Yes, he did. And I said, is that what this is about? And he said, yes, it is. And I was like, what do you want to do? And he said, we just want you to come in for 2 days, just see what happens, just have some fucking fun. And then I came in, and that's all I wanted, man. I wanted 2 days, just come in and have fun. And something happened in that first 2 days that was I didn't realize how large it was. All I ever want to do when I'm in a studio with somebody is I just want to make everyone in this room laugh. And you don't think about people listening. And in that show, I was getting text messages all the time from all over the country. And then I started getting offered acting roles, and then, got, just based on stuff I would say on the show. I got offered acting roles in Sex and the City, and later on King of Queens, and things just started happening from there. But the audition was supposed to be a 2-day audition. It turned into 2 days a week, every week for the next 10 months or so. And then by the time we got to that end of that run, I was in 2 days a week, and then they would bring in Florentine and Kimmel and Richard Jenny, Adam Carolla, Jeff Ross. Then they started bringing Artie in. Then Artie started doing 2 days a week. And then that middle day on Wednesday, they would start rotating. But it was just me and Artie doing 2 days a week every week. And then they finally gave the job to Artie. And then I started getting work. So it launched my career.
Well, at some point, Tom Chiusano shit his pants and realized that I ran out of credits from college and hadn't been going to Hunter for about a good 2.5, 3 years, which is completely illegal, which could have cost him his job. And he brought me in his office frantic. Are you still getting credits? I was like, Tom, I haven't been getting credits for like, I don't know, 3-4 years. Well, you can't be here. I was like, what? I was like, well, then pay me. And he was like, no, we can't. I was like, so you're saying I'm fired from not getting paid? And he was like, you just can't be here. He had no answer. And I was like, okay, so I'm not supposed to be here tomorrow. And he's like, yes. So now I walk Howard down. I was like, Howard, Tom just basically said I'm not supposed to be here tomorrow. And Howard doesn't want anybody else touching his food. He doesn't want anyone embarrassed. It was just me. So I was like, Tom said it. So Howard was, I'll take care of it. So their answer was, for me working 60 hours a week, they paid me 30. Because if they paid me 40, they'd have to offer me health insurance. And they gave me basically minimum wage, which at that time was like $6.35, $6.40 or something. Oh my God. So I got paid 30 at $6 an hour. So Howard made that happen. Like, okay, thanks. I didn't care. I was making, so it was actually, I was hustling on the side anyway. I had my hustle on. So about a year later, now once they have that corporate leash around your neck, now you got to do this. Now you got to do that. And that started happening. I was like, okay. And it was a year. The year was up. And so I now go sit and Tom renegotiate. I was like, look, Tom, I just working 60 hours. Really, why don't you just pay me for 40 so I can get health insurance? That would be kind of cool. And can I get a little more? He's like, no. I was like, I'm not asking you to pay for me for the 60. Just give me 40 so I can actually go to a doctor. He goes, no. You'll work 30. I'll give you the company standard increase, which is 25% on $6.40. What does that come out to? I don't know, but it's not a lot. And he goes, that's that. And then from now on, you have to leave when you can't work after your 30 hours. I'm like, So I again had that conversation with Howard, bringing him down. I said, told him what I just told you, and this is the moment I decided to leave. Howard goes, that's Tom. And then I went, yo, I'm done. So if I stay here and have to eat that bowl of shit every day, I'm going to get fired. I'm going to burn this bridge. I'll never be allowed back. So I said, you know what? I'm going to LA to be an actor, and I'm leaving the show. I might as well bow out like a gentleman and not go out like a punk, because it would have been bad.
So that is this edition of Here's the Pitch. It's called How I Met Howard. And hopefully you enjoyed it. Again, new ones coming soon, so keep your eyes and ears open to YouTube here. Search ST Weekly if you're not already subscribed, and you should be subscribed by now. But tell your friends. ST Weekly, Sports Talk Weekly, Stern Talk Weekly. We're doing it all right here at YouTube. And lots more coming. Many guests in the hopper coming up. And hopefully you enjoy those as well. We'll see you next time. Thanks.